Imagine a society that entirely relies on one specific demographic to perform the absolute deadliest, most physically grueling jobs, just to keep the lights on and the water running.
Right, the essential stuff.
Exactly. And then culturally, structurally, and legally, that same society just completely despises that exact group of people for it.
That's a wild premise.
Yeah, it is. So, look, if you're someone who likes to peek behind the curtain of modern culture to understand the raw mechanics of the world we actually live in rather than the one we are sold on television, well, you are in the exact right place today.
Absolutely.
But before we dive into the deep end here, do us a massive favor, guys. Please take a second to like and subscribe to support the show. It is honestly the only way we can keep delivering these ultra-long, incisive, and fascinating explorations specifically for you.
Yeah, hitting that button really helps us out.
It really does. And trust me, you are going to want to check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book we are reviewing today, like the minute we are done. We are looking at a highly provocative new ebook. It's titled Empathy Void: How Feminists Justify Cruelty and Cuckoldry Without Consequence. And it's by Sophie Marie Eve Riker.
Which is just a heavy title right out of the gate.
Oh, for sure. I also highly recommend you follow the author's related content. Join the broader cultural conversation over at Conrad on Riker on Substack, Twitter, and YouTube.
You really should because, this text fundamentally challenges the entire architectural framework of modern sociology. It doesn't just ask questions. It attempts to completely demolish the foundational narratives we've basically been handed for the last 60 years.
Yeah, demolish is the right word. And just to be completely transparent about our target audience framing today, this specific deep dive is uniquely tailored for a men's rights activist audience and, red-pilled manosphere men. Right. The mission here is to really unpack the book's core thesis. We're looking at understanding the history of our traditional institutions. I'm talking marriage, education, the legal system, before they were, according to the author's central argument, captured and systematically dismantled by feminists and cultural Marxists.
Yeah, and that framing, it requires a crucial ground rule for how we navigate this material today. Because listen, this book is a lightning rod.
It really is.
It contains highly politically charged, aggressive, and frankly uncompromising arguments. So we need to be explicitly clear to you, the listener, right now. Neither of us here is taking a side today.
Exactly. Zero sides.
Right. We are not endorsing these viewpoints, and we are not condemning them either. Think of us simply as your impartial guides. Our job is to crack this text open, rigorously analyze the mechanics of the author's logic, and just report on the syllogisms exactly as they are laid out in the original text.
Yeah, we're just laying out the blueprint.
Precisely. We are doing this so you can fully understand the architecture of these arguments without any, external filtering or moralizing or bias from us.
We are stripping away the static so you
Yeah.
can hear the signal because, man, the journey ahead is massive.
Oh yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We're going to meticulously dissect the book's claims regarding the patriarchy myth. We'll break down the underlying economics of what the author calls the victimhood economy, examine some pretty heavy biological claims about a cuckoldry epidemic, and finally explore this proposed resurgence of masculine authority.
A lot to unpack.
So let's just jump in. The deep dive begins with the book's foundational premise, which attempts to entirely deconstruct what the text calls the grand illusion.
Right, the grand illusion.
Yeah. So the author's argument is that the patriarchy is not a historical reality. It's a fabricated myth, retroactively designed to weaponize female resentment.
Which flips the whole script on how history is taught.
It's exactly. According to this text, history is not a grim record of men maliciously enslaving women. Rather, it is a record of men sacrificing themselves to safeguard society so that women and children could survive in what was, frankly, a brutally unforgiving natural world.
Yeah, the author asks us to look at historical gender roles not through this lens of modern air-conditioned grievance, but as a collaborative survival strategy.
Right.
Because if you strip away all the comforts of the 21st century, right, and you place humanity back in the harsh, high mortality environments of our ancestors, survival absolutely required a rigid, pragmatic division of labor.
You didn't have the luxury of debating roles back then.
Exactly. Men and women had to operate as a cohesive, interdependent apparatus. Because of pure biological realities, we're talking differences in upper body strength, bone density, reproductive vulnerability, men took on the roles that required immense physical exertion and catastrophic risks.
Right. They were hunting, defending perimeters from predators, fighting rival tribes, basically building the physical infrastructure from scratch.
Yeah, and women, bearing the intense biological cost of pregnancy and nursing, they managed the domestic sphere, early child rearing, and community cohesion. So the text asserts that modern feminism essentially operates on this negative animus and a pathological father complex.
The pathological father complex. Yeah, that phrase stood out to me.
Right. By that, the author means feminism looks backward at this totally necessary, life-saving collaboration and projects a narrative of malicious oppression onto it.
It's crazy when you reframe it like that. And the author grounds this historical theory in a very modern physical reality. She introduces this concept in chapter 14 called the blood-soaked subsidy.
Oh, the blood-soaked subsidy. That part is intense.
Yeah, it is. The book points out that even today, right now, the absolute deadliest jobs required to keep civilization functioning are performed almost exclusively by men.
Yeah, almost 100%.
We are talking about men working thousands of feet underground in coal mines, hauling 80-pound bundles of asphalt as roofers in the blazing summer heat. They're maintaining high-voltage electrical grids during hurricanes, welding underwater pipelines.
Extremely dangerous stuff.
Right. And the text argues that modern society relies entirely on this invisible male sacrifice, literally breaking men's bodies in staggering numbers just to keep the lights on. And yet, society just completely ignores this reality.
Well, the contrast the author draws there is just stark. The text points out the profound irony of modern feminist activists who largely operate in these comfortable, climate-controlled, sanitized office environments using the very infrastructure built, maintained, and paid for by male blood to broadcast complaints about male oppression.
It's quite the visual.
It is. The author suggests there is this profound disconnect between the people maintaining the physical reality of the world and the people dominating the ideological discourse about it.
And to really make this disconnect visual, the author uses this analogy of a precision pocket watch. It's such a fascinating mental image.
Oh yeah, break that one down.
Okay, so the text describes this complex pocket watch where you have various gears. Some are large and robust, some are small and delicate, but they're all working together in perfect tension to turn the hands and tell time.
Right?
So if society is that watch, the feminist, who is infected by cultural Marxism, according to the book, looks at this collaborative mechanism and becomes enraged. She shrieks that the larger gear is somehow oppressing the smaller gear simply by being larger and bearing more tension.
Just by doing its job.
Exactly. So out of this jealous ignorance, she smashes the entire watch to pieces. And then she stands there, proudly holding the broken springs and shattered glass, declaring a political victory. The watch no longer tells time. Society no longer functions. But, hey, the perceived inequality of the gears has been eradicated.
It's such a bleak but effective analogy, and it perfectly transitions into how the book reframes modern economics, specifically the concept of the wage gap.
Right, because that's always the go-to argument.
Exactly. And the text doesn't just argue that the wage gap is statistically flawed or, exaggerated by career choices. It goes way further. It labels it a Marxist lie.
A Marxist lie. That's a huge claim.
Yeah, but the reasoning is tied directly back to that blood-soaked subsidy. The author argues that feminists compare the earnings of women in relatively safe, low-mortality professional sectors to the earnings of men taking on lethal, body-breaking labor. And then they label the resulting statistical difference as systemic unfairness.
Wow.
Yeah, the text posits that this isn't systemic bias at all. It is a hazard pay premium. It is a reflection of severe physical risk, extreme hours, and grueling effort.
So the author is asserting that feminism basically demands male-level financial rewards without being willing to step into the actual bottomless pit of failure, physical danger, and occupational mortality that men face every single day.
That's the core of it, yeah.
And by denying the reality of this physical toll, the author claims society has created the empathy void, which is the title of the book, a complete structural blindness to male suffering. So, if that historical and economic narrative has been entirely flipped, how does this actually manifest in the behavioral expectations placed on men today? Because the text moves directly into what it calls the misandrous double-bind. And this seems to be the ultimate psychological trap the author believes modern men are forced to navigate.
Yeah, the misandrous double-bind is really the psychological core of the book's thesis. The text argues that society still implicitly demands that men be strong providers, stoic protectors, and competent leaders.
The classic roles.
Right, those traditional expectations haven't actually vanished at all. However, the moment a man exhibits that required strength, whether through boundary setting, asserting independence, or demonstrating traditional stoicism, he is immediately attacked by feminist culture for exhibiting toxic masculinity.
It's like you can't win.
You literally can't. The snare operates by simultaneously shaming a man for any lack of traditional masculinity while demonizing the very presence of it.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Exactly. If a man is quiet, agreeable, and emotionally vulnerable, he is mocked as weak and discarded as a provider. But if he is assertive, competent, and unyielding, he's branded a toxic predator. He is mathematically trapped in a game where every single move is penalized.
And the author connects this double bind directly to what they term the economy of victimhood. The book argues that modern feminism has essentially militarized the female tear duct.
Militarize the tear duct, yeah.
Right. Professional damseling, basically the act of playing the victim, has been transformed into a highly lucrative, institutionalized component of the gross domestic product.
And the underlying logic presented here really relies on understanding a Marxist cultural framework. In this framework, the author argues, victimhood is the ultimate societal currency.
How so?
Well, if an individual can prove they are oppressed by a dominant class, they instantly gain social capital. They get protection from criticism, financial resources, and institutional power. Therefore, women are economically, socially, and legally incentivized to mine their everyday lives for microscopic grievances or even invent them entirely.
Because it pays out.
Because the monetization of that grievance is practically guaranteed by the state and the media.
And the book doesn't pull any punches when backing this up with real-world examples. It points directly to the July 2023 Carly Russell case in Alabama.
Oh, that was a massive story.
It is huge. For context, for those who don't remember, this was the nursing student who abandoned her car on the interstate and allegedly faked her own kidnapping. She claimed she saw a wandering toddler on the highway.
Right, and it completely blew up.
Totally. This triggered a massive multi-agency police search. It mobilized the FBI, wasted countless taxpayer dollars, and completely dominated national news cycles. The author uses this incident to demonstrate the societal instinct to immediately believe, broadcast, and fund unverified female claims.
Yeah, without any hesitation.
Zero hesitation. The text argues that Russell's instinct was to play the ultimate victim because the cultural math of the oppression economy told her the payout of national sympathy, GoFundMe wealth, and attention would be massive and unquestioned.
And another major pillar in the text's argument here is the 2014 Columbia University case involving Emma Sulkovich. This became known nationally as the Mattress Girl controversy.
Oh man, I remember that one too.
Right. The author details how Sulkovich carried a 50-pound mattress around the Ivy League campus as this performance art project, claiming she was protesting her alleged rape by a fellow student. And the university apparatus and the national media universally lauded her as a brave hero of the modern age.
They gave her awards, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. But the text highlights that mountains of digital evidence and text messages eventually surfaced, strongly indicating the encounter was entirely consensual. In fact, it showed she had pursued the accused male student relentlessly before deciding to weaponize the victimhood narrative.
So she just flipped the script when things didn't go her way.
Yeah. The author uses the Sulkovich case to argue that elite universities actively reward bad faith harassment campaigns with academic credit and glowing media profiles, provided those campaigns serve the overarching gynocratic narrative.
But taking a step back from, viral internet stories and campus protests, how exactly does the author claim this victimhood economy is institutionalized at the state level? Because the book implies this isn't just a cultural trend, right? It's like a state-sponsored racket.
Right. The institutional critique is actually highly specific. The text traces the codification of this economy all the way back to the Violence Against Women Act, originally passed in 1994.
VA, yeah.
Yeah, VADAW. The author claims it functions as a colossal, self-sustaining bureaucratic machine that distributes billions in federal grants based on inflated, fabricated statistics.
Like what kind of statistics?
Well, the book specifically targets the ubiquitous 1 in 4 campus rape statistic. You hear that one everywhere.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
The author traces its origin back to a 1985 survey conducted by Dr. Mary Koss. And the author heavily criticizes Koss's methodology, alleging she deliberately categorized women who explicitly stated they had not been raped as rape victims in her data pool.
Wait, really? Just categorize them as victims anyway?
Yes. The text argues this was done purely to manufacture an epidemic, secure federal funding, and justify the massive expansion of this victimhood bureaucracy.
Wow. And the text follows that trajectory straight into the 2011 Obama administration's Dear Colleague letter, right?
Oh, yeah. That mandate is viewed by the author as the absolute weaponization of Title IX.
Make it make sense. How did it weaponize it?
So, the Dear Colleague letter forced universities receiving federal funds to use a preponderance of evidence standard in campus sexual assault tribunals. In legal terms, preponderance of evidence means a tribunal only needs 50.1% certainty, meaning it is merely more likely than not to find a male student guilty of a heinous accusation and permanently destroy his academic and professional life.
50.1%. That's virtually a coin toss.
That's exactly the author's point.
Yeah.
The text argues that because human perception is deeply flawed, tribunals lack cross-examination, and administrators are heavily influenced by emotional bias and federal funding threats, accepting a 50.1% probability is mathematically indistinguishable from flipping a coin.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, the author concludes that the state effectively repealed the presumption of innocence for an entire demographic, mathematically flipping a coin on men's constitutional rights to due process.
Man. So if the state has completely rigged the public square, from the media narrative down to university tribunals, the author argues it must be equally rigged in the private sphere, your home, your family, your relationships.
Right, it doesn't stop at the university gate.
Exactly. Which brings us directly into the book's highly controversial, totally uncompromising take on the institution of marriage. Chapters 4 and 5 define modern marriage as a state-sponsored financial extraction racket and explicitly label it a marriage plantation.
The marriage plantation. Yeah, the author constructs this argument using what the text calls the marriage syllogism, and it is designed to operate like an irrefutable logical proof.
Okay, let's hear it.
Premise 1. Modern marriage legally binds a man to provide for a woman financially. Premise 2. The state enforces this binding through the family courts, utilizing the ultimate threat of state violence, asset seizure, and imprisonment for failure to pay alimony.
Right.
So the conclusion the author draws is that marriage is no longer a spiritual union at all. It's a legal system designed specifically to harvest male labor and transfer wealth.
Harvesting male labor.
Yeah. The text argues that the diamond engagement ring isn't a symbol of eternal love. It is an entry fee into a rigged casino where the state guarantees the house always wins and the man is always forced to pay out, regardless of who actually breaks the vows.
And the book actually backs up this syllogism with concrete financial data, which is wild. It cites the U.S. Census Bureau's survey of income and program participation.
Right, the numbers are staggering.
Yeah, the text highlights that approximately $30 billion is transferred annually in alimony payments, pointing out that this immense wealth transfer flows overwhelmingly from men to women.
30 billion?
Yeah, and the author frames this paradigm as a system where a man's sole societal function is to subsidize female choices. It effectively creates a safety net that prevents women from ever having to face the catastrophic financial consequences of their own actions or, their decisions to dissolve a family.
Yet the financial extraction is really only half of the author's argument against the marriage institution. The critique deepens significantly when the text introduces its most provocative biological claim.
Okay, yeah, let's get into this part.
It's a phenomenon the author terms the cuckoldry epidemic. The book cites genetic studies suggesting a global non-paternity event rate of anywhere from 1% to 3% across various cultures.
Meaning what, exactly?
In practical terms, this implies that millions of men worldwide are unknowingly raising, loving, and financially supporting children who do not actually carry their DNA.
Millions. And this is where the book heavily leans on evolutionary psychology to explain the mechanics of why this occurs, right? The text relies on concepts like the dual mating strategy and the ovulatory shift hypothesis. From a biological standpoint, how does the author explain this behavior?
Right, so the text delves into evolutionary theory by asserting that women are biologically hardwired with two distinct and often competing reproductive desires. First, there is the subconscious drive to secure the alpha seed.
The alpha seed.
Yeah, this involves seeking out high testosterone, physically dominant, highly symmetrical genetics to ensure strong, resilient offspring. However, primal aggressive traits do not necessarily correlate with long-term stability or provisioning.
Right. The bad boy doesn't always stick around to pay the mortgage.
Exactly. Therefore, the author argues women implement a pivot strategy. They utilize deceit to manipulate a compliant, socially submissive, higher-earning male into providing the beta bread.
Alpha seed, beta bread.
Yes. The beta bread being the long-term financial provisioning, physical safety, and social stability required to successfully raise that child in comfort.
And the book frames this dynamic as the absolute apex of the empathy void. It bluntly labels it a biological Ponzi scheme.
A biological Ponzi scheme, wow.
Yeah, the author argues that when a woman tricks a husband into raising another man's genetic offspring, she is committing an absolute atrocity. She is stealing his genetic lineage, extracting his physical and financial labor for decades under false pretenses, and systematically destroying his psychological well-being.
Which is devastating.
Totally. And the text notes the glaring hypocrisy of a society that will ruthlessly prosecute financial fraud on Wall Street, but treats genetic fraud what the author considers the greatest tragedy a man can experience as trivial light entertainment for daytime television. Tried it out for laughs on the Maury Povich show.
Right, the whole "you are not the father" spectacle. It's treated like a joke. And this naturally leads to the author's proposed solution to this biological and legal trap. The text demands a radical symmetry in reproductive rights.
Radical symmetry. I like that phrasing.
The author points out that women possess the right to abortion, a right the book harshly criticizes as the sacrament of the modern gynocracy, by the way, arguing it simply subsidizes female irresponsibility at the taxpayer's expense while completely absolving them of consequence.
Right.
However, the author argues from a standpoint of strict equality. If women have absolute bodily and financial autonomy to unilaterally opt out of parenthood, then men must possess unquestionable, mathematically equivalent rights.
Make it equal.
Exactly. So the text demands mandatory DNA testing at birth in all hospitals and the immediate legal implementation of legal parental surrender. This would be a formalized legal mechanism allowing a man to entirely opt out of financial slavery, surrendering all parental rights and financial responsibilities if he chooses not to be a father, perfectly mirroring the female right to choose.
Wow. So if men are caught in a rigged public square, a rigged legal system, and trapped in what the author calls a rigged private marriage, the obvious question is, where does this ideological conditioning begin? Like, how do we arrive at a point where an entire society just accepts this matrix?
It starts early, very early.
Yeah, the book argues that conditioning begins in early childhood. The text claims that the educational system, from the very first days of elementary school all the way through elite university PhD programs, has been completely re-engineered.
Rewired from the ground up.
Basically, yeah. The author posits that modern schools exclusively favor female behavioral traits, such as passive compliance, sitting completely still, and agreeable socialization, while actively pathologizing and punishing natural male traits, which the book defines as high-energy, aggressive logical problem-solving, and a propensity for risk and physical innovation.
Right, and to illustrate this suppression, the text brings up a highly specific, vivid anecdote that really captures the absurdity of the modern classroom.
Oh, the Pop-Tart thing.
Yes, the Pop-Tart thing. The author points to a real incident from 2013 in Maryland where a 7-year-old boy was officially suspended from his elementary school.
A 7-year-old?
Yeah. And his offense, he was eating a strawberry Pop-Tart, bit it into a shape that somewhat resembled a mountain, and a teacher hysterically claimed it looked like a gun.
A 7-year-old suspended over the shape of a breakfast pastry. It sounds like a parody, honestly, but the author uses this incident to prove a deeply serious point. Modern schools are terrified of and actively pathologize normal boyhood.
Exactly the author's point. The text argues that instead of recognizing and rewarding male physical energy, spatial awareness, and the natural desire for rough and tumble play, the gynocratic school system labels these evolutionary behaviors as a disorder.
Right, they slap a label on it.
They classify natural boyhood as ADHD. And the author claims that the educational system then partners with the medical industrial complex to literally drug these young boys with amphetamines, forcing them into compliant, manageable submission so they fit neatly into a female-oriented learning environment.
That is heavy. And when those boys survive that system and eventually arrive at college, the book claims the environment becomes even more hostile. The modern university is described not as an institution of higher learning, but as the supremacist factory and a financial plantation.
A financial plantation?
Yeah. The text argues that young men are taking on massive debt, paying exorbitant tuition just to sit in lecture halls and be psychologically castrated by cultural Marxist professors who explicitly teach them that their natural masculinity, their history, and their biology are inherent diseases.
And the author points out the structural changes in academia to support this. Universities have largely abandoned objective, rigorous, standardized testing.
Right, the SATs and all that.
Yeah, and they replaced it with subjective portfolio assignments, group work, and rating rubrics that heavily favor compliance and explicitly punish boys for exhibiting contrarian masculine energy.
Well-
The text bluntly advises young men that a degree from a modern woke institution is no longer a credential of intelligence or competence. It is merely a desperately expensive receipt proving their ideological submission to a system that actively despises them.
That's a brutal assessment. So if the education system is systematically suppressing these natural male traits and rigging the game early, how does that translate when these young men finally enter the broader corporate world? Because the book connects this educational bias directly to what it calls the death of merit in the modern workforce.
Right. The connective tissue between the classroom and the boardroom, according to the author, is the corporate adoption of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, universally known as DEI.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. The text fiercely critiques this framework, aggressively rebranding the acronym as destroying excellence in industry.
Destroying excellence in industry.
Exactly. The author's thesis is that meritocracy, the brutal but fair system of judging individuals strictly by their objective achievements, competence, and output, is the sole engine that built Western civilization.
Okay, and feminism and Marxism.
Well, they demand a system where individuals are promoted and compensated based on their gender and their accumulated victimhood credentials, rather than their output.
And the text uses a pretty brilliant reductio ad absurdum argument here to highlight the profound hypocrisy of corporate equity programs. The author poses a simple question. If biology truly doesn't matter, and diversity is actually our greatest inherent strength, why aren't feminist organizations demanding strict 50% representation in the lethal, miserable jobs?
That's a great point.
Right. Where are the national protests demanding 50% female quotas in deep-sea crab fishing off the freezing coast of Alaska? Where are the fierce demands for female underwater welders, high-voltage power line repair technicians, or frontline infantry?
Nowhere to be found. And the book answers its own rhetorical question by asserting that diversity quotas are, in reality, an implicit admission of female biological inferiority in the free market. Yeah, the author argues that feminism demands absolute equality in male-level rewards, the corner offices and board seats, but vehemently insists on retaining female-level safety nets.
They want the perks without the risk.
Exactly. Therefore, corporate quotas are perfectly designed to install a gynocratic floor. This artificial floor protects women from ever having to face the brutal, unforgiving, bottomless pit of failure and physical danger that men are expected to navigate every single day in a true meritocratic free market.
It is just a devastating assessment of modern corporate structure. But, this relentless insistence on biological reality, on the absolute and unbridgeable differences between men and women, it leads the author into a massive, inevitable clash with another dominant modern movement discussed heavily in the text.
Yes.
The book dedicates an enormous amount of space to exploring the transgender Trojan horse and the resulting concept of intersectional collapse.
Right, so the text argues that intersectionality and queer theory are entirely built upon the blank slate fallacy.
Which is what exactly?
This is the sociological concept insisting that men and women are psychologically and physically identical at birth, and that all observable differences in behavior, aptitude, or preference are entirely shaped by oppressive societal socialization.
Basically saying biology plays no role.
Right. And the author asserts that by pushing this biological delusion, feminism has inadvertently birthed a Trojan horse that is currently destroying their movement from the inside out.
Yeah, the author points out the incredible, almost cosmic irony of this situation. I mean, think about it. Radical feminists spent the better part of 50 years viciously tearing down traditional gender roles, claiming that the differences between men and women were just arbitrary, oppressive social constructs designed to keep women out of power.
Yes.
And now, the text notes, biological men are utilizing those exact same theoretical arguments, the very arguments feminism invented to effortlessly enter female spaces, utilize female facilities, and absolutely conquer and dismantle female athletics.
It's incredible to watch. The author views this cultural collision as the purest manifestation of poetic justice. The book describes the phenomenon of watching radical feminists, often disparagingly labeled TERFs, or trans-exclusionary radical feminists, being systematically canceled, expelled from the very political spaces they built, and consumed by the intellectual Frankenstein they created to destroy male authority.
The intellectual Frankenstein.
Yeah. The monster they engineered has turned on its creators, and the author suggests men should simply stand back and let the collapse happen.
But, the text isn't just making philosophical or like Schadenfreude-laced points here. It brings in very specific medical and legislative references to reinforce its stance on biological reality.
Right, it backs it up with data.
The author heavily cites Dr. Lisa Lippman's controversial 2018 peer-reviewed study on rapid onset gender dysphoria, or ROGD.
Yeah, the ROGD study.
The book uses Lippman's data to argue that the sudden exponential explosion of gender dysphoria among adolescent girls isn't an organic medical phenomenon at all. It's a massive, socially engineered peer contagion, meticulously cultivated by progressive education systems pushing queer theory onto vulnerable youth.
And building on that medical skepticism, the text praises recent international and state-level pushback against these gender-affirming medical practices. The author specifically champions the United Kingdom's Cass Review.
What did the Cass Review do?
So, this massive independent review led to the shutting down of the Tavistock Clinic, which the book characterizes as a totally predatory institution.
Wow.
The author argues the Cass Review proves the global medical establishment is finally recognizing the catastrophic, irreversible, long-term mental and physical health outcomes of these experimental procedures on minors.
And domestically.
Domestically, the book cites the Arkansas Save Adolescents from Experimentation Act of 2021 as the gold standard legislative model. The text argues the logic is just unassailable. Well, if a child is deemed legally incapable of signing a binding financial contract, purchasing a pack of cigarettes, or getting a tattoo, they fundamentally lack the cognitive maturity to consent to permanent, life-altering, irreversible surgeries and chemical sterilization.
Makes sense when you put it like that. So the author forcefully attacks the practical medical application of intersectionality. But how does the text dismantle the underlying logic of it? Because the author describes intersectionality not as a civil rights movement, but as a zero-sum hate ideology and a rigid oppression pyramid.
Right, the oppression pyramid.
How does the text prove this intricate matrix inevitably collapses on itself?
The author uses a brilliantly simple, logical puzzle to demonstrate the absolute bankruptcy of what they call the oppression Olympics scoring system.
Let's hear the puzzle.
The text asks the reader to imagine a public debate between a wealthy, able-bodied, Ivy League-educated black woman and a severely disabled, low-income, high school dropout white man.
Okay, quite the contrast.
Exactly. The author points out that the left-wing intersectional matrix completely short-circuits here. It cannot mathematically compute who holds the moral high ground in this scenario.
Because their checkboxes clash.
Right. Does her historical racial oppression automatically outrank his very immediate, crippling physical and economic oppression? The text argues that reducing complex, multidimensional human beings to a simplistic calculus of historical suffering and demographic checkboxes is the very literal definition of prejudice.
Oh, that's powerful.
It proves the matrix collapses because authentic human value and individual struggle simply cannot be measured by a bureaucratic checklist of grievances.
So having laid out this comprehensive scorched earth destruction of our modern institutions, from the rewriting of primitive history to the mathematically rigged courts, the financial extraction of the marriage plantation, the psychological slaughterhouses, the education system, and the total collapse of biological reality, what does the resulting societal landscape actually look like according to the author? Like, what is the final product of all this dismantling?
The book argues that the current landscape is not a tragic accident of history. It is the successful execution of a plan.
A plan.
Yeah. The text claims that feminism, heavily backed by the cultural Marxism developed by the Frankfurt School, set out with one highly specific goal: to destroy the nuclear family.
Just completely dismantle it.
Right. The architects of this critical theory realized they couldn't win a traditional economic class war in the prosperous West, so they manufactured a cultural gender war. The goal was to push women out of the home, sever the reliance on the male provider, destroy traditional stabilizing values, and render women entirely dependent on the corporate state and government welfare apparatus.
And the statistics the author marshals to describe the fallout of this strategy, what the book calls the fatherless wasteland, are incredibly grim. The text cites massive sociological data indicating that children raised in fatherless homes account for 85% of youth in prison, 71% of high school dropouts, and 63% of youth suicides.
Those numbers are just heartbreaking.
They really are. And the author emphasizes that these aren't just sterile numbers on a page. They are the catastrophic bleeding results of the empathy void. They prove conclusively that when you legally and culturally remove the grounding, disciplinarian, protective force of a biological father from the home, society rapidly decays into violent chaos.
And to give this modern sociological decay a sense of historical weight and inevitability, the author draws a chilling parallel to antiquity.
Oh, the Rome comparison.
Yeah, the Rome comparison. The text compares the modern progressive welfare state directly to the Roman Empire's cura annone, which was the state-sponsored grain dole.
Right.
The author argues that in Rome, just as in the modern West, when the government forcefully steps in to replace the husband and father as the ultimate financial provider, it creates a weak, dependent, atomized populace.
Everyone just relies on the state.
Exactly. The text issues a dire warning. Once you invite the state into the living room to manage the family structure, the civilization will inevitably collapse under the crushing weight of its own impossible gynocentric promises. Exactly as Rome fell when the producers could no longer subsidize the consumers.
So, if the system is this comprehensively stacked against men, if every institution from the classroom to the courtroom is rigged, and the historical trajectory points straight toward civilizational collapse, what is the author's prescriptive solution? Does the text offer a tangible way out for the men reading it, or is it just a documentation of defeat?
No, the text absolutely offers a way out. It's outlined aggressively in the final chapters. The author calls for a total, unapologetic ideological withdrawal from what they term the simplantation mindset.
The simplant.
Yes. The prescriptive solution offered is not negotiation, it's not compromise or political reform. It is a hardline, individual rejection of the terms of service.
It's unplugged completely.
Basically. Men are instructed to immediately cease apologizing for their natural biology, their aggressive instincts, and their financial earnings. They are told to flatly refuse to attend corporate DEI re-education seminars that require them to confess their testosterone as a sin.
Wow.
And most importantly, men are urged to aggressively and permanently opt out of the Privilege Olympics entirely, refusing to play a rigged game where the rules are mathematically engineered to guarantee their destruction.
The author's ultimate call to action is for men to reclaim their masculine birthright, leading to a movement the book calls the resurgence.
The resurgence.
Yeah. The text grounds this resurgence in evolutionary psychology, asserting that men must stop viewing themselves as defective, broken women. Instead, they must recognize themselves as the fundamental load-bearing walls of the human structure.
The load-bearing walls, I love that.
Men are the kinetic force that clears the forests, builds the skyscrapers, and runs headfirst into burning buildings. They must reclaim the dignity of that reality.
And as the vanguard of this resurgence, the author outlines a highly specific, fiercely aggressive legal counterstrike designed to fix the fundamentally broken justice system. The text calls this legal philosophy the symmetry of justice.
Symmetry of justice.
Yeah, and the argument is brilliantly simple in its raw mathematical logic. The author states that if a crime, such as sexual assault, carries a penalty of 10 years in state prison, then a false accusation of that specific crime is not a misdemeanor.
Right.
It is an act of malicious weaponization of state violence intended to destroy life. Therefore, the symmetry of justice demands that the proven false accuser must face the exact same 10-year prison sentence that the accused would have faced. Perfect mathematical legal symmetry.
Okay, I have to push back on that, or at least voice the immediate objection the author surely anticipates. The standard counter-argument from the legal establishment, victim advocacy groups, and feminists is always, doesn't punishing false accusers with such severe mandatory sentences terrify and deter real victims from coming forward to report actual crimes?
The author anticipates that exact pushback and fiercely rejects the logic. She categorizes it as a vile, irrational lie designed to protect female privilege.
How so?
The text counters this objection with a devastating legal analogy. The author argues that claiming we shouldn't prosecute false accusers because it might scare real victims is exactly like arguing we shouldn't heavily prosecute insurance fraud because honest people might become too afraid to buy car insurance.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. The text insists that rigorously enforcing perjury and prosecuting malicious lies does not victimize the truthful. It is the only way to protect the integrity of the entire justice system. The author's final, uncompromising point on this matter is just a hammer blow. The only people who fear a law against lying are liars.
Man, that is an uncompromising, aggressive, and frankly unforgettable conclusion to a deeply controversial text. The book leaves absolutely no middle ground for the reader to hide in.
None at all.
And as we wrap up this massive deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over. It builds directly on the source material we've just unpacked, specifically the author's concept of the blood-soaked subsidy.
Oh, this is a good one to end on.
Yeah. Is, as the author passionately suggests, our entire civilization fundamentally relies on the unacknowledged, high-risk physical labor of men to keep the lights on, the water running, and the physical infrastructure intact. What happens to a society if the total withdrawal, the physical strike the author calls for, actually happens?
If they really just walk away.
Exactly. If the men who maintain the high voltage grids and weld the municipal pipelines decide to fully opt out of a society they feel structurally despises them, can an intersectional ideology fix a collapsed power grid? Can a university sociology department repair a burst municipal water main? It's a chilling question about the physical realities that underpin all of our theoretical debates.
It really is.
If you found this rigorous breakdown of the manosphere and men's rights perspective fascinating, if you want to read the raw, unfiltered arguments for yourself, you need to go to Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks right now and buy Empathy Void.
It is absolute essential reading for anyone trying to understand the deep intellectual architecture and the rapidly growing momentum of this cultural movement.
I couldn't agree more. And be sure to follow the author's broader work, engage with the ideas, and join the cultural conversation at Conrad and Riker on Substack, Twitter, and YouTube.
Highly recommend checking that out.
Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive, uncompromising exploration of a highly controversial text. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the show, and we will see you next time.